Kiler, 1997 Polish comedy from Juliusz Machulski, perhaps the biggest classic out of the 1990s Polish comedy classics. It was a very specific period in Polish cinema, with the country just coming out of the political transformation a few years prior, and filmmakers sort of delving into this new reality while still keeping some of the comedic sensibilities of the communist period. Kiler itself is a very beloved film here in Poland, endlessly quoted to this day and sort of cherished in the general consciousness. To me, it was the first time I've seen it in probably around 20 years, so it was interesting to revisit it with a fresh eye and see if it has changed and if my perception of it has changed, and if the film itself has aged in the 25 years since its release. So the story follows a Warsaw taxi driver named Jurek Kiler, who is framed by a hired assassin, nicknamed by the police Killer, to be the actual killer. He's arrested and put in jail, and seeing as his explanations are not listened to at all, he sort of decides to go with the flow, tries to pretend to actually be the killer, which leads him into more and more bizarre and complicated situations. So how does the film survive the confrontation with the passage of time? I would say not ideally. There are still moments where I was laughing my ass off. The performances are very entertaining, characters fun to watch, but there are also evident flaws. There are jokes which don't land anymore, and honestly I sort of have to ask myself seriously if they ever should have. There are some pacing problems where sometimes the scenes don't flow naturally from one to the other, but rather feel like a collection of comedy sketches. I also think that the heist plot that the movie is moving towards in the final act is very clunky in its execution. Just to give you an example, the final set piece requires a person to get a very particular half of a 2,000 pesos note, go with that note to an airport terminal, deliver it to a specific person, and then take the money received in exchange. And there are multiple parties in the film who are after the note and after the money, and they're trying to outmaneuver one another and stab each other in the backs. And since each of those parties tries to use Killer against the rest, each of them explains their own plan to him. Now this leads to a situation where we as the audience are, together with the Killer, subjected to the same exposition, the explanation about the note and the terminal and the money, 4 separate times. Now, yeah, it makes sense in the story for the character to have to get that explanation again, because the new people don't know that he already knows this, but it also shows that the screenwriter didn't really have a good idea of how to hide it from the audience to improve pacing and save time. I mean, every time we are given the same information that we already have, it feels boring and you kind of want the movie to skip forward to the next thing. And you see, this is a very specific example, but I think there are other smaller things in the movie which could have been improved in similar ways, but just never have been. And I think if you look at the film through this lens of being a lifelong fan of it, you may not even spot them, but examining it with a fresh eye without any expectations, these flaws really become apparent. So yeah, and I won't say I didn't have fun. I thought the film is still decent overall, but I do think it's far from being the timeless masterpiece that some people still paint it to be.